Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Maria and thank you for being here. In this video, I'm going to be sharing some of the most recent books that I've read and just sharing my thoughts on them. I'm eager to hear if any of you have read these books or if any of you have any similar recommendations or anything. I love reading all types of books, and I think in the past years, I've diversified a lot of the genres that I read. I think before I used to exclusively read fantasy, I think. But now I read more diverse, which is very nice. And I'd like to thank my housemate Rahel because I think she is one of the main reasons that I'm reading more diverse books, because she's an amazing reader and she has amazing, brilliant recommendations. So yeah, here we go. The first book that I'm going to be talking about is actually Severance by Ling, and I just finished this today. I really enjoyed it. It follows this girl who was originally born in China and raised there for a few years, but then her and her family immigrate to the US, and it basically follows her going through the end of the world. There is a plague where people basically turn into these zombie-like creatures if they're infected. And it's very interesting because I think most of the media, or all of the media that I've ever seen that is related to zombies, is usually very violent, very post-apocalyptic in nature. Whereas in this book, it's very tame. They're not violent at all. And all they're basically doing is repeating the same mundane tasks that they would have done in their ordinary, usual lives. So, for example, cooking the same meal over and over, doing the same job over and over. And I think that really brings up interesting topics around the mundane of life, also jobs and how they supposedly give us value. For example, the main character, while all of this is going on and basically where she's living in New York, everything stops working and almost everyone is infected. She's one of the last people who isn't infected. And she still goes to her job until the last day in her contract, which is very interesting. I think the ending fell a little bit flat for me. It just felt like it was building up to something that never happened. So that was a little bit disappointing. But I think there are a lot of interesting themes and topics that could be discussed from this book, and I found it interesting because of that. So I recommend. The next book that I want to talk about is When the Cranes Fly South by Lisa Ridzé. I apologize if I'm not saying the name correctly. It's a book translated from Swedish, and it's about this man named Bo who's 89 years old, and he lives with his dog called Sexton. And he has carers that basically go to his house every single day to take care of him because he's unable to take care of himself, unfortunately, at his old age. And his wife is also in a care home because she has Alzheimer's. And the story centers around the fact that Bo's son wants to take Sexton away from him because he doesn't think that Bo is able to take care of him as a dog should be cared for, which is understandable and makes sense. And the argument is basically that Sexton would be better off with another family that can take him for longer walks, take care of him properly, and this type of thing. And it's a very beautifully written and emotional read because it kind of takes you through this situation where it's like, you want to do what's best for Sexton the dog, but also it's so sad for Bo, for his only daily companion to leave. So I think that was very interesting and very well done, kind of that conflict between what should be done for the dog and for Bo. The story is told from Bo's perspective, and it's basically a letter to his wife, which is also very beautifully written, and it jumps between the present and past, which is also very interesting because you get to see Bo's relationship with his parents and also Bo's relationship with his son, which is as you can tell throughout the book, quite complicated and nuanced, and I think is very moving the way it's written and the way it's described. You can really empathize with Bo, but also with his son Hans. And by the end of the book, I ended up crying a lot as someone who was super close to their grandparents. And my grandma had dementia and suffered a lot at the end of her life, unfortunately. So this book really played on my feelings. I couldn't stop crying by the end. Just the way that the author describes Bo's inability to do the things that he wants to do, and the way that he's so dependent on other people and that he can't, basically he wants to do things and his body betrays him, which is very sad. So I found this book very interesting, especially when it comes to also the way Bo talks about work and how he was treated at work, and the value that his son puts on work is very interesting. It kind of makes you think about how as you grow older, it's harder to find a job, it's harder to switch jobs, it's harder for companies to want to keep you, which is very horrible and unfair. So I think that it does portray those experiences very well also. So I highly recommend this book. I found it very beautifully written, very interesting. I think I say interesting 10,000 times in this video, but I really enjoyed reading it, and it was very emotional. So I think depending on the level of emotion you want to feel, think about reading it or not, but it is very nice and I highly recommend it. The next book is The Compound by ling, and this book is described as Love Island meets The Hunger Games, which I would disagree with. I think if you go into this book thinking that it's going to be anything like The Hunger Games, you're going to be disappointed, for sure. So I would recommend this book for anyone who is interested in the dynamics around reality TV shows such as Love Island, and with a little bit of dystopian flair, I would say. So if I had to describe this book, I would say it's more Love Island on drugs. The book is set in a dystopian setting where there are these group of men and group of women who sign up to be sent to this compound in the middle of nowhere. And they have to do challenges to get basic necessities. They can't talk about what their life is like outside of the compound, but there are these illusions that there's a war and they weren't happy in their previous life, and this is why they decided to get into the compound. And so they're basically just talking about really mundane things between each other, which is kind of what happens on reality TV shows usually, even though there are points and moments on reality TV where you kind of get a glimpse of a person's trauma or something to connect more with them. But I think a lot of the times, for example, in Love Island, from what I've seen, a lot of it is like these group of men, these group of women sitting around talking about how they feel with their connections, and what they like about this person or that person, and who they want to be in a relationship with, and all of these things, versus talking about what their life is like, what books they like to read, and their interests and all of these things. So I think that is very similar to reality TV, and it makes you really think about it, how strange it is that these people are kind of on TV and you don't really know that much about them, but you feel really connected to them and you're rooting for them to a degree. It does get quite dark by the end of the book, and I think there are elements throughout the book that are also quite dark. And I also found it very interesting how patriarchal roles are portrayed within the book, how the women are usually the ones that are doing the cooking and the cleaning, versus the men are building and taking care of security and this type of thing. And also the way that the women are kind of always competing for the men's attention, versus how the men are usually just there and they're waiting to be fought over to a degree, and it feels like in these situations, they always have more power. At least that's how it's seen in my eyes, even when I look at reality TV, the little that I've watched. But every time I see it, it is very interesting to kind of see the power dynamics and how the difference between how women go into it and how men go into it. So I did find that very interesting. So I would recommend this book, but I wouldn't recommend it if you're expecting something like the Hunger Games, because it isn't, for sure. But I overall enjoyed it. I enjoyed discussing it with my housemate. Also, what was very interesting about the book is the importance towards brand deals. So basically, the contestants can receive gifts from different brands, and they have to specifically thank the camera for the gifts. And the more gifts that they get from the more luxurious brands, the more chance that they have that then once they're outside of the compound, they basically become an influencer, in brief. So that is also very interesting to think about, because I guess a lot of people nowadays go into reality TV wanting to become influencers or are already influencers, and they want to boost their visibility. So that is very interesting to think about, because I think before, at least from when I was younger, when I think of reality TV, it seemed to be a little bit more genuine, kind of like if you're going on a TV show to find love, a lot of the times you really find people that really want to find love. Whereas nowadays, I think it's more people just want more visibility. They want more followers. They want more brand deals. So yeah, the next book is a book that I think everyone on BookTube has heard about for sure, and that is A Little Life. This book broke me emotionally to a degree that I never thought is possible. Before I recommend it to anyone, I think, as I'm sure you know, I would research the trigger warnings before reading this book, just because it's so heavy. But yeah, I think I have no words to describe this book. It just made me feel so many things. The characters felt so real. I think by the end of the book, it felt like I watched 10 seasons of a beloved show like Parks and Recreation or something, where by the end of it, you feel like the characters are really real. So yeah, it's incredibly devastating. It was very hard to read at times. I cried a lot. I thought I would cry more, but I did cry a decent amount. I really enjoyed the writing style. I recommend it, but with caution. The next book I think is also quite popular. It's Pachinko by Minjin Lee. And I actually read this with my book club, which was also very nice. The characters of this book are very complex, very intriguing. I would really recommend this book. It's set in Korea and in Japan during the early 1900s. So it was very interesting also to read about that period, about the dynamics between Korean and Japanese people, about the pachinko parlors and that entire world and how it's usually associated with crime. I would definitely recommend this book if you like historical fiction. I also really liked the female characters within the book. I think they were way more interesting than the male characters. And I think it was a consensus within the book club that we wished that there was more focus on the female characters at the end. But it's fine. Overall, it was still very nice to read. The last book I want to talk about is Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross. I actually wrote some notes on my Hobonichi after I read it, so I'll read this. So I said I was immediately hooked by this book. The writing style was very beautiful, and it felt like a fantasy I haven't read before. I feel like recently all of the fantasy I've been reading follows the same storyline, the same tropes. So this was very refreshing to read. It basically follows Matilda, who is the youngest goddess in her clan. She's blessed with humble messenger magic, and she uses to carry words and letters through different realms. And within the book, the gods kill each other for power, which is something quite different. I don't think I've read anything like that. Maybe there are a lot of books like that, and I just haven't been exposed to them. And there is a romantic element to the book. Matilda meets a romantic interest from the mortal world, and it kind of develops from there. I found the world building to be very interesting. However, I did feel like I really wanted more when it came to that. Ever since Matilda meets her romantic interest, I felt like there wasn't enough detail around the politics, the world, her powers. I wanted to understand more. I wanted to know more, read more about it. So I do recommend this book. However, I do hope, I'm not sure if there's going to be another book in the series or if it's a standalone, but I am hoping that if there is, I will for sure read it. And I hope that there will be more detail when it comes to more world building, so to say. So that's it. Those are the books I've read recently. Let me know if you've read any of them, if you have any thoughts on them, if you have any recommendations, and I'll see you soon with another video. Bye.